So the iPhone 5S came out in 2013, and it's been a lot of years. It's been about 8 years or whatever, 9 years. And now we get to finally talk about it in 2022. Now, I would never think a phone like this would last this long. And even back when I got this phone, I wouldn't even think I would still be making videos on this phone, which is so crazy. And the fact that you're watching this video means that some people are still interested in this device, which is so crazy to me. Now, I wouldn't recommend buying an iPhone 5S anymore for the most part, but if you want to find some phones I would recommend this year, links are down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now with the iPhone 5S, this was the flagship of 2013 from Apple, which is crazy because now when you look at it, this is like a phone that you can probably find like on eBay for like $10, $15, $20 nowadays. But this phone actually is one of the most important phones Apple has made as well, and this device was still getting updates as of last year. It may get another iOS 12 update this year, but that's crazy just the amount of longevity that this specific phone still has in this day and age. Now, in terms of the body, this is still a very beautiful looking phone, and it is still one of my favorite design phones of all time. The iPhone 4 is probably number one, but this is definitely up there. I mean, we had a 4-inch IPS panel, definitely not the best looking panel anymore, but at that time, this was a very, very good looking panel, and I'm sure a lot of people were in love with this panel for sure. Now, this was also the first iPhone that we saw with a fingerprint sensor on the front, and since then, we've gotten some fingerprints here and there with like the iPhone SE2 and the iPhone 8 Plus, but it looks like Touch ID 2 may end up coming back as well, which is going to be amazing. We still have the fingerprint sensor on the iPads and everything, but this was the first iPhone to bring it, which is awesome. Now on the bottom we have the Lightning port and we have the headphone jack as well. And this was another flat-sided iPhone. In fact, this was one of the last flat-sided iPhones we had until about the iPhone SE second generation, until the iPhone SE first generation in 2016. So this phone in that sense also meant a lot because it kind of signifying the end of a certain model. And on the back, the flat side with the two glass panels on the top and the bottom, which always kind of intrigued me, and the rest of it being aluminum. I mean, this is a very good looking phone and it still feels extremely beautiful in the hand. I don't know why my voice has changed like that. So this is what I'll tell you in terms of the body. Very good looking phone, very decent looking panel, and for being, almost 9 years old this year, it's still a very good looking phone, and I'm very happy with the design that Apple made, in this specific year. Now, in terms of the cameras, we have to hit on them. It has a single 8 megapixel camera on the back, and it has a 1.2 megapixel front facing camera. Now on the front, you can actually do 720p video, which is really interesting, and on the back, you can do 1080p video. So this is what I'll tell you in terms of this specific camera. I will definitely say it's not a bad camera even in this day and age. It's definitely grainy, the UI is definitely choppy, but the main issue I have with this specific phone is the lack of a ton of features that we expect nowadays at the bare minimum. First of all, it only has a single lens, so compare that to, the other phones that have came out since then, that's kind of a big issue. Also, it's a very small lens, so there's really not that much capability there. There's no portrait mode, there's no cinematic mode, there's nothing like that. So you're kind of missing out on that. And there's no 4K at 60 or even 4K at 30 on the front or the back of the specific phone. So that's another minor issue. I will tell you though, the camera quality from this thing isn't really that bad. I still think if you needed to use a phone, this thing would be pretty good for the most part, and you're really not going to have too many issues there. So for basic tasks like taking a photo, taking a video, maybe making a slow-mo video here and there or panorama, this thing should be able to handle everything you throw at it for the most part. Another big thing is there's a lot of apps on the App Store that can kind of replicate some things that the newer iPhones can do. So that's another pretty big thing to keep in mind as well. Ultimately, in terms of the camera, I probably wouldn't recommend buying it just for the camera nowadays, but if you still had to use it, I don't think I would complain about it too much. A lot of the applications are pretty much upscaled for these iPhones, even like Snapchat and like TikTok. So they utilize these iPhone cameras really well, even on an iPhone 5S. So in terms of the camera, that pretty much covers it up there. Now hitting on the longevity of these iPhones, the big thing about this specific iPhone like the iPhone 5S is that it was supported for such a long period of time. I was not expecting this iPhone to get as many updates as it did, and that's what's so crazy about it. You would expect that something like the iPhone 5S to be, outdated many years ago, but this thing was still getting software updates as of about a couple of months ago, which is so crazy to me. Personally, I would not expect that at all, but we actually ended up getting that, which is crazy in and of itself. So when it comes down to that, what I will tell you is that I wouldn't recommend buying the iPhone 5S because of the long software support it has ahead of it. But when you look behind it, it's actually very interesting that this phone started off with iOS 7 and it ended up getting so many versions of software that it's still kind of supported to this day. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up there. Now, in terms of the performance, this is another very interesting thing about the iPhone 5S. This thing has that Apple A7 chip inside of it with 1 GB of RAM. Now, I will tell you, I don't think this performance is like beating the iPhone 13s. I don't even think it's beating an iPhone 6s or 7. But like I mentioned, when you actually have something like an iPhone 5S, it's still a pretty decent performing phone for how old this phone is. Like I mentioned, I wouldn't go and buy this phone just based off the performance, but when you actually look at this phone and you actually think about how old this phone is for it almost being 9 years old, it's still surprising how great of a performing phone this thing is. I mean, it's crazy. Now, if you had to use this phone every single day, I honestly think I probably could. I don't think it'd be like a crazy big deal. However, when you have something like an iPhone 5S, you're still getting like, a very smooth experience with iOS. And that's one of the most important things about this phone. It's not running like a very bloated version of iOS or a very bloated version of Android. It's a very smooth performing version of iOS, and iOS 12 was one of the most important updates I think of all time. It was very smooth and very stable, and I'm glad the iPhone 5S actually kind of ended with this software, because if it kept going, it probably wouldn't have been that great of an experience. Now, it doesn't have the latest and greatest features that iOS 15 has, but I do think it's probably a more stable version of software than the most recent versions of iOS that have came out since then. So what I'll tell you about the performance is that I really wouldn't recommend buying this phone based on the performance, but if you still happen to use it, I actually do think it's pretty interesting for how how old this phone is and for the price of this phone as well. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this device has that 1560 mAh battery, and this is another one of those phones that I think, at that time, the battery life may have been amazing. Maybe not on iOS 7, but maybe like iOS 8, 9, and 10. The battery life may have been amazing, and maybe towards the end of its life cycle, maybe it got a little bit better, but because it's kind of an old phone, unless you're planning on replacing the battery and it doesn't have 100% battery health, the battery life's not really going to be that great anymore. And that's kind of another big thing to keep in mind. When you even look at something like an iPhone 13 mini nowadays, even an iPhone SE 2nd generation, those phones are going to be giving you better battery life than something like an iPhone 5S. So in terms of battery life, that pretty much covers it up there too. And kind of summing up this whole entire video, what I'll tell you is that the iPhone 5S, I think, is still one of the most important iPhones Apple has ever made, and it's still actually a supported iPhone kind of from Apple. I mean, this phone came out in 2013, and the fact that Apple's still kind of supporting it here and there is very interesting. Now, it's not getting full OS updates like the 6S, so we can't give it that credit. But the fact that it was getting iOS 12 updates for many years after iOS 12 was unsupported is insane to me, and I don't really think people remember how crazy that thing is. So I wouldn't recommend buying an iPhone 5S anymore. Really, any other iPhone, even the ones I have linked down in the description, are much better than this specific phone, even if they're more expensive. I just would highly recommend avoid buying an iPhone 5S in this day and age. But I'm still surprised that this phone turns on, the fact that I can still kind of do what I throw at it, and I think that in and of itself, it deserves some credit there, right? So I'll kind of leave it at that. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.